Welcome back to my series of lectures on stellar evolution. I am Professor K.M. Raghavendran, MES College of Arts, Commerce and Science, Malleshwaram, Bangalore. In this third lecture of the series on stellar evolution of low mass star, I would be looking up or explaining to you the red giant phase of evolution in a star. I will also talk about planetary nebula and the end stage of low mass stars called as the white dwarf. I will not be elaborating on the structure and properties of white dwarf in great detail in this lecture, which will be done in the lecture number 4, where we will talk of compact stars as a whole. So, the question that we are really going to ask is what happens to a star at the end of its main sequence stage? If you recall, in the last lecture, we had focused on the main sequence stage and the general features of the main sequence stage. So, in this lecture, we will concentrate on the three aspects of evolution after the main sequence stage, namely red giant, planetary nebula, and white dwarf. Now, before we really start that, I think it is essential to recall some of the salient features of the last lecture. We saw the star evolves from its initial, what shall I say, giant molecular cloud where it is born, and it passes through certain phases like T Tauri stage, etc., and comes to the main sequence stage. The main sequence stage is represented in the HR diagram by the main sequence band. The HR diagram, you will recall, is a graph of the stellar class as a function of absolute magnitude, or alternately the surface temperature as a function of luminosity. The chief features of the main sequence band is that, of course, I should also remind you that if you look at any part of the sky, about 90% of the stars that you would see are likely to be found in the main sequence stage. This indicates indirectly that this is one of the most stablest state in the star's life, particularly when it is generating energy. The position of a star in the main sequence is determined solely by its temperature. Solely by its mass. And the more massive stars are likely to be very much brighter and luminous and also have a high surface temperature, while the less massive stars are likely to be less bright and also have low surface temperature. The surface temperature in the main sequence stage, as you can see from this graph, can range anywhere from 30 to 40,000 Kelvin to as low as 2500 to 2000 Kelvin. The two crucial points to remember and understand regarding the main sequence stage are: number one, inside the main sequence star, at every point, the equation of hydrostatic equilibrium is maintained. You will recall that hydrostatic equilibrium is essentially the condition where the inward force of gravity on the stellar material is counterbalanced by the outward force coming due to gas and radiation pressure. This balance is represented by the equation called the equation of hydrostatic equilibrium. The second important point is within the main sequence star, there is a temperature equilibrium as well, or a thermal equilibrium. Now, what do we mean by thermal equilibrium? In the context of main sequence star, it means the establishment of a negative temperature gradient from the core to the surface. That means the core will be at an extremely high temperature, while as you progressively go outwards, the temperature will fall and the surface will have a much lower temperature than the core. In fact, the core will have temperatures of the order of million Kelvin. That is where all the nuclear fusion, as I explained in the last lecture, will be taking place. Now, the energy that is produced in the core has to be transferred to the surface and then radiated to the outside space. So, to facilitate this flow of energy, there has to be a temperature gradient that is established. So, when the star is in the main sequence stage, these two equilibria, the hydrostatic equilibrium and the thermal equilibrium, which really means the establishment of negative temperature gradient, is very much the central feature of the main sequence. Of course, the star maintains a constant size during the main sequence phase and it emits radiation at a constant rate. That means its luminosity will be constant. Probably the most important point to understand is that during the main sequence stage, the star produces enormous amounts of energy by the process of nuclear fusion of hydrogen nuclei, that are protons, to helium nucleus. In the last lecture, we looked at different pathways for this, like the PP cycle, CNO cycle, etc. So the question we are going to ask is, when all the hydrogen in the core is exhausted. Now here I would like to once again recall that when you look at a star, the core region is essentially a region within the star which is around by volume around 10% of the star's volume from the center, or in terms of radius one can imagine the core as a sphere of radius 0.1 r, where r is the entire radius of the star. So when all the and of course you will also recall that because of the temperature gradient, the fusion of hydrogen does not occur throughout the volume of the star. It occurs only in the core, and that energy is transferred to regions outside the core. The question is therefore, this main sequence stage will come to an end when almost all the hydrogen in the core is converted to helium and the fusion of hydrogen stops. Now when the fusion of hydrogen stops, it will remove the radiation and gas pressure in the core, which was actually providing the necessary hydrostatic balance. So the core will now resume its original collapse, and once again the temperature of the core will increase. This we saw by virial theorem. We understand that whenever there is a contraction of the material, there is a loss in gravitational potential energy, and part of it, in fact 50% of it, is converted to an increase in kinetic energy by virial theorem. We understood this. So when this core collapse resumes, the energy that is now produced, the thermal energy, heat energy that is produced, will be transferred out of the core, since this heat energy cannot be used by the core to support itself against gravity. Why? There are two important reasons. Now, if during the main sequence stage, the core had collapsed due to some reason, breaking the hydrostatic equilibrium, the contraction of the core would have resulted in increasing the temperature of the core and therefore increasing the rate of hydrogen burning, because hydrogen was still there, and thus gas and radiation pressure would have also gone up, and that in turn would have pushed the core and made the core regain its original size and hydrostatic equilibrium. So the heat energy that is produced by a contraction of the core during the main sequence can be used to burn hydrogen within the core. This will not happen once the hydrogen is exhausted. Secondly, of course, conversely, had the core expanded slightly during the main sequence stage, the rate of reaction of hydrogen conversion to helium would have gone down because of a fall in temperature, and that would mean gravity would have dominated and once again pulled the core together in order to regain the hydrostatic equilibrium. So what we are trying to say here is essentially that at the end of the main sequence stage, when the core is resuming its collapse, the resultant increase in temperature of the core and energy that is produced by gravitational contraction cannot be used for maintaining the hydrostatic equilibrium. This energy is transferred outside the core. Now this has two effects. The heat that is transferred outside the core will now start heating up hydrogen which is present outside the core, and eventually hydrogen outside the core will reach a temperature of fusion around 10 million to 15 million Kelvin, and you will have a shell of hydrogen burning around the core. Remember, the core is relentlessly contracting. The temperature required to fuse helium, we will see, is much higher. So that is why initially this heat energy which is transferred outside starts burning hydrogen in a shell. Now, when hydrogen starts burning, hydrogen burning means conversion of hydrogen to helium. So you have a core which is contracting as shown here, and the heat energy now that is produced going outside the core will start burning hydrogen in a shell around this core. Now, when this hydrogen is burning in a shell, that will also convert itself to helium, and that helium is also falling on the core, remember. So, the density of the core will also keep on increasing because of more and more helium getting, falling into the core, and at the same time, the core is contracting. Now, the next point is important. The heat energy is not only used by hydrogen to get converted to helium in a shell, the heat produced by such a reaction will also have a large amount of gas and radiation pressure produced, and that will have an effect of pushing the stellar material outward. So the material of the star outside the core and outside the shell will start increasing, will start expanding, which means the surface area of the star will start increasing so much that this large surface area would mean the star would look much brighter now. However, a large surface area also means a low surface temperature. So what happens is, as the core collapse resumes, the heat energy that is generated, thermal energy generated due to contraction, gravitational contraction of the core, has the effect of expanding the outer material of the star. And because the surface temperature now becomes much, much lower than what it was earlier due to increased surface area, the star will look much reddish and orange and yellowish, I would say very reddish in color. And that is why it is called a red giant. Why giant? Because the size, as I will explain now, can become as big as a few astronomical units. So, the red giant phase is a phase where the star is having a core which is collapsing, and at the same time outer material which is expanding. Of course, you should also understand the average density of the star would come down now, because essentially the same material that you had in the main sequence is now spread over a much larger volume. So in effect, when a substantial amount of the hydrogen in the core has been exhausted in the main sequence, the main core starts to contract again, and the outer layers slowly start growing larger and larger and become redder and redder, and also look brighter because of the larger surface area. This process actually will start accelerating more and more as the core keeps on contracting and keeps on generating more and more heat, thermal energy by gravitational contraction. The sun, by the way, is still in its early main sequence stage, and in the next 4 to 4.5 billion years, when all the hydrogen in the sun's core gets exhausted, it will reach this phase. And then it will become what we call as the red giant star. This picture shows you the sun in its present state, its size, and relatively when the sun becomes a red giant, what would be the estimated size? You see the diameter is going to touch almost 2 astronomical units. That means the sun is going to bloat up so much that it will gobble up Mercury inside it, Venus, and probably the Earth as well, or come very close to the Earth's surface. So, to get a proper perspective of this, here is a diagram that will make you understand how big a red giant would be and why it is called a red giant. So, the current position of the sun and size of the sun is this. As it evolves into a red giant, it's very likely that even the Earth would go inside the sun. If not inside the sun's surface would come so close to the Earth, of course, all life form in Earth would simply be burnt out. On the HR diagram, we will see that the star will move from the main sequence upwards and to the right of the chart in what is called the giant branch. So, if you look at the HR diagram, you will have something like this. If you want to represent in the HR diagram the evolutionary path from the main sequence to the red giant, it would be something like this. Because the star is becoming cooler, surface, you remember that HR diagram plots the surface temperature on the x-axis. So the star is becoming cooler. However, it is also becoming brighter, not because it is emitting more energy, rather because it's becoming much bigger. and therefore it will look very bright, and you will see its luminosity being more. So this branch is called the red giant branch. Okay. While the outer layer has been expanding, the core is relentlessly contracting and becoming hotter and hotter and hotter. You might have guessed, eventually the core will reach a temperature of 100 million Kelvin. That is around 10 to the power of 8 Kelvin. Now you have reached a temperature where helium nucleus can start fusing. Why do you require higher temperatures for helium fusing? Simply because helium has 2 protons and 2 neutrons in its nucleus. The Coulomb repulsion between 2 helium nucleus is much larger than the Coulomb repulsion between 2 protons. So to overcome the Coulombic barrier and to fuse requires much higher kinetic energy for these particles, and that is why higher temperature. So at this stage, when the temperature in the core by gravitational contraction has reached about 100 million Kelvin, a process called triple alpha reaction converts 3 helium nucleus to a carbon nucleus. Now, why we say 3 helium nucleus? That is because it turns out that there is no stable state of 2 helium nucleus getting converted to beryllium. When 2 helium nucleus fuse, it will give rise to beryllium nucleus, and we now know that there is no stable state of beryllium. I will come to that. Before that, I will just show you in this chart that schematically the core will at the end of this as the core gets hotter and hotter and hotter, eventually the core will get hot enough to fuse helium, as you will see now, to carbon, and that in turn will cause a very rapid rise in temperature to almost 300 million Kelvin, and there will be a sudden flash when large amount of helium is converted to carbon. And this process, as I will explain now in the next few slides, will last for a short period on the stellar scale, about 1000 years or so. When this happens, of course, we cannot, for example, when the helium flash happens inside the sun, we cannot see this flash because we will be trying to look into the sun through the outer regions of the sun. So this will be happening inside, as we will see. So I'll come back to this triple alpha reaction. I'll try to explain to you why we call it triple alpha reaction. See, it turns out that when 2 alpha particles or 2 helium nucleus fuse, they should give rise to beryllium. Now this beryllium 8 which is produced is a highly unstable state. It will last for a very, very short interval of time. So 2 helium nucleus cannot fuse to become beryllium. I would not say cannot fuse. What I mean to say is you will not have a buildup of beryllium because this is an extremely short-lived state for the beryllium. There is no stable state of beryllium 8. That is what I really wanted to mention. But then what happens is, in this excited state, beryllium can actually fuse with another alpha particle and produce carbon 12. So 2 helium will directly produce beryllium 8, which is a very, very unstable state for that nucleus. By unstable, we mean that it is a very short-lived nucleus. And if there is sufficient density and temperature in the core, within this short lifespan, beryllium 8 can combine with another helium nucleus to form carbon 12. So effectively, 3 alpha particles or helium nuclei gets converted to carbon nucleus. This is called the triple alpha reaction, and this produces enormous amount of energy. It was Fred Hoyle who first suggested this. Now, because the triple alpha process produces a large amount of energy, and it already requires a very, very high temperature and density which is there in the core, it is able to overcome the beryllium barrier, and subsequent capture of alpha particles becomes quite easy for the beryllium that is produced. So we talk of a runaway triple alpha reaction. what I'm trying to say is just this, that initially the two alpha particles will be taking sufficient time to become beryllium by some fusion, by the profusion process. But once these more and more alpha particles produce this beryllium, it will also this reaction will also give energy. So the temperature of the core will also increase and the density will also increase. So as the density and temperature increases, it will facilitate the capture of another alpha particle and conversion to carbon. So this is kind of a runaway reaction, and that's why it's called helium flash. This produces a large amount of energy for a few years. Now this input of energy at the core will actually reverse the evolution that has happened so far. Prior to the helium flash, the core was actually contracting. So as soon as the helium flash starts, the core will start expanding because now you have new energy that is produced, giving rise to radiation and gas pressure. On the other hand, the outer portion will start to slightly contract because it is not receiving as much energy now as it did earlier. Remember, earlier the core was contracting and the increase in temperature and energy was not used for reaction, nuclear reaction. So that energy was going outside and that could expand the stellar material. Now when the energy started getting to used in the core, the outer regions of the star will slightly contract. So in the HR diagram, you will see that the star, as soon as the helium flash happens, will start moving slightly to the left and slightly to the lower end. So as the star is trying to adjust to this situation, it will become slightly smaller and less luminous, and it actually moves down and to the left of the in the HR diagram on the horizontal branch. So here we have shown the reaction that two helium nucleus. I have left out the atomic number. Helium has an atomic number 2, a mass number 4, and beryllium has an atomic number 4 and a mass number 8. So this is the initial reaction giving rise to beryllium, and it's a very short-lived nucleus, and that combines with another helium to form carbon. So helium now starts burning steadily at the core, getting itself converted to carbon. So this picture also shows you what happens after helium flash. So as the star evolved along this giant branch, kept going up, surface area became larger and larger, surface temperature became smaller and smaller, the star looked brighter and brighter. So as the helium flash happens at some point, the star will slightly become smaller in size, and therefore its brightness, as you can see here, the brightness will slightly come down, but the surface temperature is likely to go up little bit because now there is helium flash which is producing energy. So there will be a slight increase in the temperature of the surface of the star. However, its luminosity will come down. So this is called the branch, the horizontal branch where it comes down. Okay. Now the exact path, whether it will come down like this or this way, or whether it will straight away come this way, that will really depend on the mass of the star. So that's important to know, that the track that it takes after the helium flash will really depend on the mass. Of course, there will be considerable loss of mass of the star also during these phases, which I will talk in a few minutes. So where are we now? What we are now come is a stage where helium is now burning at the core by triple alpha reaction, and the core is building up more and more carbon. In some cases, if the mass of the core is sufficiently large and the temperature is also sufficiently high, carbon also can combine with another alpha particle to form oxygen. Okay, in this chart, what we mean when we say helium core burning, CO in the center builds up. This is not carbon monoxide. What I mean is carbon and oxygen in the center. Of course, oxygen, to form oxygen, you require still higher core temperatures. So in the low mass stars that we are talking of, oxygen will not really have, be formed to a large extent. But there are situations where we will see when we talk of supergiants, oxygen can also be formed at higher core temperatures. For the time being, essentially, it is only carbon core. Now, as this helium flash is happening and more carbon is building up, the energy that is produced by fusion obviously has to come out. So as it is coming out, it will start burning helium in a shell outside the core. So now you have a shell structure developing. You have a core where the triple alpha reaction is powering the energy, and you have carbon building up in the core, more and more and more carbon. The energy from that reaction is coming outward. As it comes outward, it kind of heats up the stellar material, and you can then after some time have helium burning in a shell around the core, and around that helium shell you have another shell of hydrogen which is burning, and then you have the stellar material where no nuclear fusion is taking place. So all this is happening in the red giant phase. When the carbon core is developed in the red giant stage, as more and more carbon builds up in the core and less helium starts to become available, you guess what would have happened. Your guess would be right if you had guessed that the core will start contracting once again. So when sufficient carbon is built up and all the helium in the core gets exhausted, the core contraction will start again. So it's a kind of cycle. Each time the core material is exhausted, the core contraction will start, temperature will rise, and that energy will be transferred to the outer layers. So when the carbon core is formed in the red giant to a large extent, the core will start its contraction again and will heat up just as the hydrogen helium core did before it. And this increase in the temperature of the core due to the gravitational collapse of the carbon core will start burning helium and hydrogen in shells around the core, and this will again cause a slight increase in the luminosity, and once again the star will grow in size. Because why it will grow in size? Because the contraction of the carbon core will not produce sufficient energy to fuse carbon, but that energy, when it goes up, it will start bloating the stellar material. So in the HR diagram, once again the star will rise around what is called the asymptotic branch here. So after the red giant, when the helium flash, during the red giant, when the helium flash happens, the star will move down on the HR diagram, and once carbon buildup in the core has happened to a large extent, and let us say around 80 to 90% of the helium in the core of the star has become carbon, the core contraction will start again. And when the core contraction start again, the star will start increasing in size once again, and so its path, evolutionary track, will start once again going up and to the right, and keeps on going up and to the right. Right? This branch is called the asymptotic branch. This is known as the asymptotic branch in the HR diagram. The hydrogen and helium burning shells will produce energy not in a stable way, but rather in an unstable way. Why? Because you see, the energy coming from the core has to come continuously and sufficiently to maintain this hydrogen and helium burning. There is a lot of instability in the energy that's coming, and therefore the hydrogen burning shells generally produce energy unstably, and the instabilities will cause the star to shed its mass, generally in the form of strong stellar wind. Stellar wind means material thrown out of the star, like this solar wind we have. And importantly, it will also produce, this instability will also produce what is called stellar pulsation. That means the star size is slightly increasing, I told you, and then slightly decreasing. So this is called stellar pulsation. This perturbation or disturbance will grow as time evolves, and the outer layers of the star, remember the material in the outer layer is huge. It can be about 1 to 2 solar masses, and it is so big. So there is instability in the outer layer, and a fraction of the material is lost by this red giant star due to this pulsation. This is very important to understand. I will tell this again. The hydrogen burning and helium burning shells will produce energy in an unstable way. These instabilities will cause the star to shed its mass generally in the form of very strong stellar winds. And these instabilities will also produce stellar pulsations in the radius of the star. As this perturbation grows, the outer layer becomes unstable. That means they start losing some of their material. And as this material in the outer layer is expanding all the time, it will be cooling and also forming dust. In a very short time, perhaps people believe around 1000 years or so, the entire envelope, the outer layers of this red giant star is actually ejected. It detaches itself from the main core. It is no longer part of the core or the star. The outer layer is ejected. Now, on the time scale of a few thousand years, this ejected material by then would have already moved, the outer layers would have already moved away, so much away from the core that they would have gone several astronomical units far, and then they will detach. When they detach, they will spread out to become quite transparent. Remember, their temperature overall can be quite high, 5000 to 8000 Kelvin as well. So you have this very nebulous material which is detached away from the central core of the star. We will see this gas which is detached away to be very shining, bright and colorful, because what happens is the X-rays and ultraviolet light that is coming from the core will ionize the material in this gas, and when these ions recombine with electrons, ions of various elements in this gas, when they recombine to form atoms in excited state, these excited atoms will emit radiation in different colors, and that is why this material that is ejected will look very colorful. This material is called the planetary nebula. The word planetary is a little bit misleading here. The reason is historical. Many years ago, almost 150 to 200 years ago, these nebula were discovered through small telescopes. But in those days, because the telescope resolution was very small, these nebula appeared to be, they were called nebula, planetary nebula, because they appeared to be patches or disks very similar to how Uranus was first seen through small telescopes. With passage of time and better resolution, we know that these are not really planets. They appear like planets with small telescopes, because Uranus was very far away, and in the early days of its discovery, it just appeared as a patch of gas, very nebulous, very faint nebulous gas. Uranium is a very huge gaseous planet. It appeared like a green disk in its original discovery. Now, this brightness of this planetary nebula is because brightness and color of the planetary nebula is because of the very strong emission lines that you get from several multiply ionized material like carbon, oxygen, etc. These planetary nebula are some of the most beautiful objects that you can see in the night sky through telescopes. In fact, the planetary nebula also indicate to us something about how the interstellar material is actually, formed in the universe, and how this interstellar material can enrich, which is enriched with many elements, can once again be part of new star formation. Now, these planetary nebula will also include the original material from the star that was born from giant molecular cloud. By the way, the planetary nebula which is ejected will constitute around 10 to 20% of a typical solar mass. So there is a large amount of mass in this. Some of the pictures of planetary nebula for your this one I'm showing here, you see these are spectacular objects. It's called the CAT. One on the left is the CAT nebula, which is seen in the NGC 6543. I would also urge you to, I'll watch that picture once again, and you observe that there is a small white dot at the center, which is the core, and this is the ejected mass. So I want you to concentrate on this, that the red giant phase is kind of ended now. The outer layers of the red giant have been ejected away because of instability, because of the huge size, and what is left is the core, which is, remember, having mostly carbon and contracting. We will come back to the core once again. It is still contracting and producing energy by gravitational contraction. But let's look at these pictures. They are beautiful pictures, and I would urge you to look at the Hubble Space Telescope website. Some of the most spectacular photos of these nebula can be seen there. And then here is yet another photo called the Ring Nebula. And you see again a small dot at the center indicating the core material star, which is still there. And this is yet another photo. And this is what we call as, I think this is not very sure, it's a dumbbell shaped nebula or some such thing. You see many of these pictures, extremely beautiful, cool pictures on the Hubble website. Once again, you can, I don't know if this resolution is good enough for you to see a small dot at the center. So, what happens to that small dot? What is that small dot? At this stage, when the planetary nebula is ejected, it is important for us to consider the mass of the core. This is a central point now. This is my last part of this lecture, and I want you to concentrate deeply here. At this stage of the red giant, when the outer layers of the red giant has been shed as planetary nebula, what is left behind is the core of carbon, which is contracting. Now at this stage, all the stars which contain a mass of the core which is less than 1.4 solar masses will have the same fate. What I am trying to say is, once the planetary nebula has been detached, if the remaining core has a mass of less than 1.4 solar masses, all such stars will have one fate of their end. If the mass exceeds 1.4 solar masses, they will take another route of evolution. Today we are talking of low mass stars whose core mass at the end of the red giant stage, the carbon core which is contracting, is less than 1.4 solar masses. Such stars will end up as what we are going to describe as white dwarf. All of them will have the same fate, including the sun in our solar system. We now believe that all stars that started with mass of up to around 8 solar masses when they begin their life will lose enough mass in the evolution up to this stage to bring them below this threshold of 1.4 solar masses at the end of the red giant stage. So then at this stage, what's going to happen? We believe many or perhaps all stars which have this mass limit will come up to this stage from the red giant phase, and they may pass through the phase of being the central stars in the planetary nebula. Now, when the nuclear reaction completely stops with all the helium getting converted to carbon and the carbon core starts to shrink and shrink and shrink, if the mass of such shrinking cores is less than 1.4 solar masses, then what will happen is one would expect that carbon will have to get converted to the next element, next nucleus, because as the core collapses, temperature should rise and carbon should start fusing. The point is that for such 1.4 solar masses or less, the core does not produce enough energy by contraction to burn carbon. So does it mean that it will go on shrinking? No. There will be a stage coming in this particular kind of stars when the core will reach a stable condition and stabilize. You may be wondering, how is it? There is no nuclear reaction because carbon is not going to burn in this. Then where is the gas pressure and radiation pressure to counteract gravity? It is at this stage that we will have to think of Subrahmanyam Chandrasekhar, who gave a theory as to what will happen to such stars. Of course, remember, the core is shrinking. They will actually become fainter and fainter because they are becoming smaller and smaller. But that temperature is rising, remember, temperature is rising because of the shrinkage, because of the core contraction, temperature is rising. How do they become stable? They become stable due to a particular new kind of pressure, which is the quantum mechanical effect, which is known as electron degeneracy pressure. Till now, what was counteracting gravity was gas and radiation pressure, which comes from nuclear burning. Now there is no nuclear burning. The mass of this remnant is not sufficiently large enough to produce enough energy by gravitational contraction to cause carbon to fuse, and therefore there must be some way in which it can stabilize. And Chandrasekhar argued that there is a quantum mechanical effect which is called as electron degeneracy. Now, what is this electron degeneracy? It's a property that will prevent the star from collapsing under its own weight, provided the core is less than 1.4 solar masses. To understand this, I will very briefly explain to you what it is. Now, as the core is collapsing and contracting, the electrons get squeezed and they come closer and closer. And when they come closer and closer, they tend to occupy higher and higher quantum states because they are fermions. They obey Pauli's exclusion principle, and large number of electrons cannot be put in the same quantum state. So as the volume of the star shrinks, or rather the core of the star, core material shrinks, the electrons are forced to occupy higher energy states, higher quantum energy states, and thereby because they resist being pushed together. And in these higher quantum states, the electrons have higher momenta and velocity, which will give rise to a pressure. And this pressure is independent of the temperature of that core. It is dependent only on the density of the core. So this highly degenerate electrons, which are in non-zero momentum states, they will provide a new pressure called degeneracy pressure, and that pressure will block or rather stop the contraction. So you have a carbon core which has reached a stage where the electron degeneracy pressure, till then it will be contracting. The electron degeneracy pressure will stop the contraction and the core collapse stops. That object will be very, very compact. Its size will be of the order of just the size of the Earth. Its mass is about 1.4 solar masses limit. So imagine a very compact object, about roughly around one and a half times the solar mass, contained in a region of the size of the Earth. Extremely dense object, a very exotic object. The temperature of this object will be very large, 10,000, 15,000 Kelvin. Surface temperature I am talking about, extremely high temperatures. And because it's of extremely high temperature of 10 to 15,000 Kelvin, it will be emitting radiation. The energy will be mostly in all wavelengths. It will look whitish, may not look whitish, sometimes even bluish. Size is very small, so that's why it's called a dwarf. The dwarf in this context is that compared to the original size of the star, this like the sun, the star has now become the size of the Earth, and it is looking white in color. The core contraction has stopped. We will elaborate on this exotic object in the next lecture. But in this context, I would like to mention about Chandrasekhar. The white dwarf represents a very stable phase, in fact the end phase of stars whose mass is less than 1.4 solar masses at the end of the red giant phase. And they will live in this phase for the rest of their lives. This value of 1.4 solar masses was actually worked out by Chandrasekhar. It is worked out by Subramanian Chandrasekhar. It's called the Chandrasekhar limit. And it's interesting to know that Chandrasekhar calculated this value in 1930 when he was a 19-year-old student and traveling on a ship from India to England to go to college. He later joined the University of Chicago as a faculty member in the Department of Physics and then later Department of Astrophysics, and was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1983. It's a very fascinating story to read about how Chandra, as he is often known in astronomical circles, discovered or rather I should say, came up with this theory of white dwarf. So you can see here the fate of a star like the sun. Finally, at the end of the red giant stage, it would become a white dwarf. It would be as big as the Earth, that's all, but it will have a mass several thousand times more than the Earth. About 1.5. In the case of the sun, virtually the entire solar mass. The planetary nebula will take away around 10 to 20% of the mass, that's all. So the remaining mass is all there. It's a very exotic object. In fact, the density is so high that if you take a teaspoon of this white dwarf material, it will weigh several tons. It can weigh 10 to 20 tons. And the surface temperature will be around 10,000 Kelvin for the sun, for example, when it becomes a white dwarf. Right now, the surface temperature is 5,000 Kelvin to 5,000 to 5,500 Kelvin. So, this central point that you see here at the center, that's the white dwarf. And this is Chandrasekhar. The expression for the degeneracy pressure was worked out by him using quantum mechanics. And it is this pressure, as you can see, there is no temperature in this expression. This pressure is solely dependent on the density of the star. And this kind of degeneracy pressure can withstand gravitational collapse only if the star has a mass of around 1.4 solar masses or less. This is what Chandrasekhar discovered. That if the central core's mass exceeds this, then even this degeneracy pressure of electrons is not sufficient to counteract gravity. That's another story for another lecture. So electron degeneracy pressure comes to the rescue of white dwarf stars and core collapse stops. So where are we now? What happens to this white dwarf with time? The degeneracy pressure, of course, being independent of temperature, dependent only on the density of the star, makes the star stable. But there is no production of energy anymore because even the contraction has stopped. When the contraction stops, obviously there will be no further production of energy by gravitational potential energy, loss of potential energy, right? So there is no contraction. There is a star which is very hot. So what will happen? It is stable right now. This energy which is there in the star has to be radiated away slowly over the next few billions of years. So as years pass by, several billion years pass by, all the energy that is there in the star would get radiated away and the star would have completely lost all its energy and it would become what we believe as a black dwarf, an object that has no energy source, a very dense object the size of the Earth and a mass around 1.5 solar masses, having no form of energy at all, and it will simply fade into the universe. Although we know that it is going to become a black dwarf, no white dwarf has lived long enough for us to observe the black dwarf state so far. The universe itself is around 13.5 billion years, and we believe that some of the older stars that we see have formed around 8 to 9 billion years ago. And the sun, for example, will in the next 4.5 billion years only it is going to become a white dwarf. After that, it will take several billion years for all the energy to be radiated away. So that is therefore the story of low mass stars. In a nutshell, this is what happens. A star is born from the stellar nebula and it becomes an average star like the sun, for instance. And we are here now. And then it evolves into the red giant stage. From the red giant, we will look into this part later. There can be another phase called the red supergiant for stars which are much bigger than the sun. It can go into this phase. We did not talk about this phase today. We talked about stars like the sun. And from the red giant phase, they will go into the planetary nebula where they eject all their outer material. And the core that is left behind is a white dwarf. So that is a kind of death for low mass stars. Of course, this material can be recycled again. Because after all, in the universe, all the material is going to be recycled. So thank you very much for listening to lecture number 3. In the next lecture, we will see what happens to stars which have a core mass of more than 1.4 solar masses and we will also elaborate on the white dwarf in a greater amount of detail.